When my phone rang that morning, I expected another bill collector or maybe my boss asking why I was late again. But instead I heard a calm voice say, "Congratulations, you've inherited 1,000 acres of land." I thought it was a prank. I was just a regular guy in a cramped apartment, struggling to keep my car from getting repossessed, and suddenly someone was telling me I owned more land than half the influencers flexing online. I drove to the lawyer's office expecting confusion, but then he placed old maps, deed records, and my late granduncle's signature in front of me. It was real, all of it. What didn't feel real was one particular line. "This land includes the residential development known as Willow Creek Community." My stomach dropped. Willow Creek wasn't just any neighborhood. It was a full-blown HOA kingdom. The place had a national reputation for being the most ruthless, rule-obsessed, fine-happy community in the entire state. And now I was being told the whole thing. The homes, the streets, the playgrounds, the clubhouse was sitting smack in the middle of MY property. According to the lawyer, they never bought an inch of the land. They built the neighborhood decades ago, assuming my uncle would never return, never check, never care. So the entire HOA existed on assumptions, not rights. And now I was the legal owner of that whole empire. When I drove to Willow Creek for the first time, it felt like a movie shot pulled from a drone. Endless pine forests, rolling fields, a river cutting through the valley, and then right in the center, perfection. Perfect homes, perfect lawns, perfect sidewalks. Ideal in a creepy Stepford Wives way. When I pulled up to the gated entrance, a security guard stepped out with the confidence of someone who believed he owned the air I was breathing. "Residents only, sir." I smiled and said, "I'm not a resident, I'm the landowner." He laughed as I had just told the funniest joke of his career. Then she appeared, Karen. I swear she didn't walk, she marched. Neon vest, sunglasses that covered half her face, clipboard gripped like she was the CEO of the universe. Her energy screamed, "I run everything here." She gave me a fake sweet smile. "Can I help you?" she asked in a tone that already assumed the answer was no. I handed her the inherited land map. "I'm here to speak with the HOA board." She flipped the paper once, barely glancing at it before giving a small laugh. "These old papers don't mean anything. This is HOA property, our property, and we enforce the rules here." Her arrogance would have been hilarious if it weren't so delusional. I kept calm. "No problem," I said. "I'll bring a county surveyor and the official land records. They'll confirm everything." For the first time, a tiny crack formed in her expression, just a flicker of fear behind her sunglasses. "The county won't say anything," she snapped quickly. "We run everything here." That's when I knew these people were living in a fantasy world. Karen turned to walk away, tossing out one last line over her shoulder. "You don't belong here." I didn't plan on saying it, but the words came out sharp and loud. "That's funny because this entire neighborhood is sitting on my land." Karen froze mid-step. Her head turned slowly, like someone whose entire illusion had just been punched in the face. And that moment, that one silent beat, was the beginning, because they had no idea what was coming next. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was scared, because for the first time in my life, I actually had leverage, real leverage, 1,000 acres of it. I sat in my truck overlooking the glowing lights of Willow Creek, watching the perfectly symmetrical neighborhood sit peacefully on something they didn't even legally own. The arrogance of that place felt unreal, but the funny part, they had lived so long inside their HOA bubble that they truly believed they were untouchable. The next morning, I returned with a county surveyor, an older guy named Martin who'd been doing this job longer than I'd been alive. When he saw the map, his eyebrows shot up. "Son, this is one of the biggest ownership mistakes I've ever seen," he muttered. We drove toward the gate again, and this time the security guard didn't laugh. He looked uncomfortable, like someone warned him not to mess with me. But before the gate even opened, Karen stormed out like she'd been waiting all night for round two. "What do you think you're doing?" she snapped before I even got out of the truck. "You can't bring unauthorized personnel into HOA grounds." Martin stepped forward with his badge. "Ma'am, I'm here on county authority, not HOA permission." Karen blinked once, twice, then put on her forced smile, the one she uses when she realizes someone has more power than she does. "Well, you can't just walk around. We have procedures." Martin ignored her and started scanning the ground with his equipment. Within minutes, he confirmed boundary markers buried deep in the soil, markers matching the maps my uncle left me. Every beep from his scanner made Corinne twitch. Every flag he placed in the ground wiped more color from her face. Homeowners began peeking from their porches, watching the drama unfold like a live neighborhood TV show. One man whispered, "Is something wrong?" Corinne hissed at him, "Go inside, HOA business." But Martin didn't hesitate. He spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "This entire neighborhood sits on land owned by this gentleman right here." The silence that followed could have cracked glass. People stepped outside fully now. Moms, dads, joggers, old couples, everyone staring at me like I was the villain in their suburban fairy tale. Corinne rushed toward Martin. "No, no, this is ridiculous. We've been here for years. We maintain the land. We run the roads. This is our community." "Not legally," Martin said. "Legally, this is his property, all of it." You could practically feel the neighborhood's foundation shift under their feet. Suddenly, a board member named Jeff jogged over, sweating, holding files, clearly panicking. "Corinne, we need to talk now." But Corinne wasn't listening. She marched straight up to my face, pointing her clipboard like a weapon. "Listen to me. You can't just walk in here and claim everything. We've built lives here. We have rights." I leaned in just slightly. "Show me the deed then." She froze completely because she didn't have one. No one did, and she knew it. Homeowners looked at each other nervously, some angry, some afraid, some whispering that they'd sued neighbors for wrong mailbox colors, while all along their entire house wasn't legally theirs. Corinne suddenly snapped and yelled, "This is my community, I built this." But her voice cracked, barely noticeable, but it cracked. That's when I realized she wasn't just controlling, she was terrified, because deep down she knew her whole empire was built on nothing. And before she could regain control, Martin placed the final boundary flag at the edge of the sidewalk and said the words that sealed everything. "Ma'am, you're standing on his property right now." And that was the moment Willow Creek officially went into full panic mode. The moment Martin said, "You're standing on his property," Corinne's face went from smug to pure disbelief, and for the first time she didn't know what to do. She stomped backward, clutching her clipboard like it could protect her from reality itself, and her voice trembled just enough to show cracks in her armor. Homeowners froze on their lawns, their mouths open, as if they were watching a live apocalypse happen in front of their houses. Some whispered, some gasped, and a few kids clutched their parents' legs, sensing the tension in the air. Corinne spun toward me, her hands shaking, pointing at the surveyor like she could somehow erase the boundaries he had just confirmed. "This is illegal. You can't do this. We've lived here for decades. We pay HOA fees. You don't understand." I took a step closer, keeping my voice calm but firm, letting the authority of the land itself back me up. "I understand perfectly. You've been living on my property illegally. That's not a matter of opinion. That's a matter of law." Her hands flew up, her sunglasses now dangling from the bridge of her nose, revealing eyes wide with panic. "I run this neighborhood. I enforce the rules. I make the calls," she screamed. And yet the words sounded hollow because the minute she admitted control, the weight of her lies and delusion started to crush her. People began gathering in small groups, murmuring among themselves, some pointing to their houses, trying to figure out what this meant for their mortgages, their yards, their perfectly trimmed hedges. Corinne's phone rang and she fumbled to answer it. She whispered into it, but the words were broken, frantic. Her minions, the HOA board members, stood frozen behind her, trying to offer backup, but all their old authority vanished the second the county surveyor's flags went into the ground. One older lady walked slowly up to Corinne and said, "We trusted you and now this." Corinne's shoulders slumped just slightly, but her eyes still burned with that obsessive fire. She spun back to me. "You can't just take everything. You don't understand the community. You can't." I cut her off. "I understand the land. I understand the law. And now this community will either accept that or face the consequences." Her mouth opened, then closed. She opened it again, but no words came. Behind her, the neighborhood kids had begun whispering to each other. The adults were nervously packing, and even the joggers stopped mid-stride. Corinne's panic started to morph into full-blown rage. She stomped down a sidewalk, pointing at the nearest house. "That's my jurisdiction. You have no authority." A man, clearly shaken, tried to intervene. Karen, maybe we should just calm down. Karen turned on him, yelling, "Don't talk to me. I am the HOA. I am Willow Creek." I stepped forward slowly, letting the weight of my inheritance and the law loom over her like a shadow. "No, Karen, you were never Willow Creek. You were just living in a fantasy. Everything you've built sits on my property, and now the law is on my side." She froze again, a single tear rolling down her cheek, the first sign of vulnerability in someone who had always been untouchable. That's when I realized something. Karen wasn't just angry. She was terrified, not for her reputation, not for fines or meetings, but because the entire world she controlled, the illusion she had created, was crumbling in front of her very eyes. And as the sun reflected off the perfectly manicured lawns, shining over 1,000 acres that were mine, I smiled slightly, knowing that this was just the beginning. The HOA had no idea what was coming next, and Karen, the queen of control, was about to learn a lesson she would never forget. By the next morning, Willow Creek was buzzing like a trapped beehive, and the tension was thick enough to slice with a knife. Karen hadn't slept. I knew that from the bloodshot eyes and the way she paced her driveway like a predator who had just realized the cage had been removed. The neighbors were whispering, phones out, calling lawyers, Googling property laws, and sharing videos of the flags Martin had planted, proof that the land beneath their feet wasn't theirs at all. Karen, meanwhile, had called an emergency HOA meeting in the clubhouse, and every board member shuffled in with nervous energy, papers clutched tightly, their fake confidence evaporating under the heat of reality. I decided to attend, not to provoke, but to witness the chaos she had spent decades orchestrating finally collide with the truth. As I walked into the room, every eye turned toward me, a mix of shock, fear, and disbelief. Karen stood at the front, her clipboard now battered, her once pristine neon vest wrinkled, sunglasses gone, and her hair slightly disheveled. She looked human, vulnerable, but still defiant. "Everyone sit," she barked, her voice cracking. "We need to stay calm and—" "Karen," I interrupted gently, "you need to tell them the truth. The entire community is on my property. Every lot, every sidewalk, every tree." A hush fell over the room. Karen's face contorted, part anger, part desperation. She slammed her hand on the table. "That's impossible. I've been president for 20 years. The county would have stopped me if this were real." I raised the inherited deed, letting the light catch the embossed seal. "It is real. And now you all have a choice. Acknowledge the land belongs to me or escalate this further." The board shuffled uneasily, muttering among themselves, some trying to placate her, others staring blankly, realizing their entire life's control was built on a lie. Karen turned suddenly, pointing at the room, her finger trembling. "No, we can fight this. We can appeal, we can." I held up my hand to stop her. "You already lost. Fighting won't change ownership. You built your kingdom on someone else's land. That's the law." She screamed, frustration mixing with fear, and I could see the neighbors flinch, realizing her power was gone. Karen's plan, whatever secret strategy she had devised for control, unraveled live in front of everyone. Outside the clubhouse, some homeowners were already taking photos of me with the deed, sharing it online, spreading the news faster than any HOA email could. Karen tried to regain authority, calling names, issuing threats, insisting on rules and fines, but no one listened. Her loyal board members began whispering among themselves, doubts creeping in, faces pale, realizing loyalty to Karen was meaningless if she couldn't save them from legal reality. Karen turned back to me, eyes wild, and shouted, "This isn't over. I will find a way." I nodded slightly, letting her think she might have a plan, even though I knew she had nowhere to run. She stormed out of the clubhouse, slamming doors, muttering about attorneys, lawsuits, appeals, and HOA bylaws. But the sound of her echo faded against the truth of the land itself. And as I stepped outside, standing on my 1,000 acres with the first real sunlight casting golden light across the property, I knew this was the turning point. Karen's reign of fear and control had collapsed in hours. The neighbors were now aware of reality, and the stage was set for the showdown. Willow Creek had no idea how the next moves would unfold, and Karen, Queen of Chaos, would have to face not just the law, but the very land that had been waiting for her reckoning. The day Karen finally realized she couldn't control anything, Willow Creek descended into complete chaos, the kind of chaos you only see in movies or viral news clips. And for the first time, I felt the full weight of owning everything, not just legally but morally, strategically, and emotionally. The sun glinted off the freshly surveyed flags marking my land, stretching across hills, trees, and sidewalks, a silent but undeniable statement of authority. And Karen, standing at the edge of her former kingdom, looked like someone who had just watched her empire crumble in slow motion, her clipboard abandoned on the ground, papers scattered like fallen soldiers, neighbors peeking from windows and lawns whispering, pointing, filming, and sharing live updates online as if the apocalypse had arrived in suburban America. And the irony wasn't lost on me that for 20 years she had dictated mailbox colors, lawn heights, and fence permits, only to discover that the ground she had walked on wasn't legally hers, that every home she policed, every fine she issued, every threat she made was built atop someone else's ownership. And the tension exploded when she spun around, noticing a group of homeowners, once loyal to her, now staring at her with confusion and growing anger, murmuring things like, "We didn't know, and she lied to us, and everything we've done is technically trespassing." Karen's face twisted in desperation, realizing she had lost the narrative, her control, her illusion, and even the power of fear that had kept the neighborhood obedient. While I calmly walked through the streets with Martin, my county surveyor, showing people deeds, flags, and boundaries, explaining clearly that they now needed to either negotiate, relocate, or accept the truth of the land they had occupied. And each homeowner absorbed the reality differently, some panicking about mortgage implications, others glaring at Karen, finally understanding they had been manipulated by someone obsessed with rules and authority. And Karen's voice, which once carried like a tyrant's trumpet across lawns, now faltered as she tried to make a stand. "You can't just, this is illegal, you can't take everything." I smiled slightly, letting the weight of my calm authority contrast perfectly with her breakdown, and said, "I didn't take anything, Karen. I inherited it. The law is clear. The land, this property, and the boundaries are mine. You simply overstepped for too long." Her hands trembled, and she looked at her clipboard, at the scattered papers, at the crowd, and at me, realizing that her power, her control, her kingdom was gone in a single day, crumbling under the weight of reality and legality. And in that moment, I saw the human behind the tyrant, fear, obsession, and regret all flashing across her face, while the neighborhood slowly, hesitantly, began whispering about compliance, boundaries, and the future. And I knew that while Karen might try to fight in court, the emotional, cinematic impact of today would be felt for years, as neighbors finally understood they had been pawns in her obsessive game, and I could feel it in the energy of the streets. A mix of shock, relief, and cautious hope. And as I stood on my 1,000 acres, surveying the land, looking at the sunrise glinting off rooftops and hearing Karen retreating, muttering about attorneys and bylaws, I realized that this was not just a story about ownership, HOA tyranny, or legal rights. It was a story about truth finally breaking through, about illusion collapsing, and about a neighborhood and a tyrant learning the hard way that no one owns what isn't theirs. And for anyone watching this story unfold, it's a lesson wrapped in drama, suspense, and pure cinematic tension. And if you want to see what happens when Karen tries to claw back control, or how the neighborhood navigates the aftermath of discovering they've been living on borrowed land, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, because the story isn't over, and the next chapter could be even wilder.